So now it's the time for you to put your questions and reflections, maybe, that you have on all the talks you have had today. And who wish to come forward first?
In self-determination theory, when we talk about the three key concepts of autonomy, relatedness, and competence, is it the case? My understanding is that the theory states that these are characteristics which we all have as a need. These are needs that we all have. Does it propose that we have them to differing degrees? And if we do have them to differing degrees, to what extent would a behavior change intervention be targeted at, given that those are needs, making it so that those needs then led to behavior change, or changing the degree to which we have those needs? So, would you want to raise the extent to which someone has a need for autonomy or relatedness, or if they were assuming they already had it, to what extent would you use your intervention to take advantage of that so that it then translated into behavior? I'm interested in your views.
Thank you, Robert. That's a really interesting question. It really is. And it's interesting because some of my colleagues back in Bangor have this very strong belief that needs will differ in strength across different individuals, and therefore you'd have to match interventions to their needs. DC and Ryan are a bit, at best, ambivalent on this. They certainly argue that these are universal needs that everybody has. They kind of duck the question on whether the needs will differ by strength across individuals, because they say it's not really relevant. And Richard Ryan has a really nice analogy for this. He says, supposing you got somebody who ate a really bad diet, so they lived off burgers and chips, okay? And they might say to you, I don't need lettuce, I don't need vegetables, I'm perfectly happy and fit and healthy eating burgers and chips. Well, they might believe that, but the fact is, if all they ate was burgers and chips, they'd be damaging their health in the long run. So the point is that people may well report, say, having a stronger need for competence than for autonomy, but according to the theory, what they report is not necessarily the case. It's underlying that is, if these needs are not met, then their health and well-being will suffer. Yeah. Oh, does that answer the question?
I think it helps.
Does it duck it as well?
Well, no, I mean, I think it is an interesting question, because if that is the case, then
this one doesn't.
Is this one not working?
Turn off yours.
I sort of have a sense of that, and a sort of analogy might be that we all need vitamins, but Scottish people don't need them so much as anyone else, clearly, because they don't have them in their diet. No, so that's a Scottish joke. But the consequences may be different for different people, to the extent to which if you don't get this need met, the extent of the consequences might be different. But what I understand then is, from the point of view of the theory anyway, that the behavior change element, and it isn't a theory perhaps of behavior change, not directly, but the behavior change element would be to ensure that the behavior change intervention met those needs, and rather than creating a need that it then met.
Yeah, absolutely, because these are inner resources that you're trying to facilitate the expression of. So you're trying to create conditions in which people can feel more autonomous, feel more competent, and feel more related. Yeah, rather than, you know, as you say, trying to impose these things upon them. I should say over and out. So.
So two minor points of addition to that. One is that, as Eliana just said, it's increasingly difficult to think of interventions where you would target one of the needs and not the others, or not one of the others, and still be consistent with the theory, because they seem to interlap or overlap to a great extent. So in practical terms, you would also be hard-pressed to design an STT-based intervention that would explicitly avoid or actually thwart one of the needs and still call it consistent with the theory. Another point is that actually, and I jumped over the mini theory called causality orientations theory, which is sort of a individual differences theory in the sense of that. It is also assumed that people do have tendencies in terms of functioning in ways that can be more or less autonomous, more or less controlled, or more or less passive in a way. So the theory also describes that this may happen, or it would happen, not because the need stopped being a need, but because the need was not met at some point during the person's development, in which people have learned to adapt in ways that make them a bit more oriented towards controlling inferences in some cases, or a bit more passive and generally amotivated, if I may say so, or being also very expressive of the need or of their own autonomy. And I think we all know these types of profiles of people that have grown to become more fine-tuned to one or the others. So there's this overlapping concept of individual differences, personality-like traits, if you'd like, which doesn't mean that they wouldn't benefit, or that you necessarily would not target one or the other need in an intervention.
Yeah, that's on. That one. Thanks. Yeah, well, as I was saying, every theory's come from somewhere, and every theory's going somewhere. So theories, like everything else, are in transition. And so when we produced the book, we didn't know, for example, which version of a theory to summarize, because when you read, even when it's called the same theory and the same people, over time it kind of evolves, morphs into rather different things. And so that's why we decided just to go with the very first publication of the theory for everything, just to take a snapshot in time. But that's all it is. And so you're absolutely right. Any one theory will have derivations that help you understand why the theory as it is. But also, many of those theories, and I suppose social cognitive theory that came from social learning theory, etc., Bandura's theory, is a case in point. It just keeps changing. So I think the time element and the developmental elements of everything is really important. And I think it goes back to what I was saying, is it depends what you're wanting to do with things. If, for instance, I'm trying to make sense of these 83 in a way that I think will help to make theory more usable in a practical way, that's a very different task than if you're really trying to get to grips with, for instance, self-determination theory. Yeah, a question for the last speaker, which I think was really interesting bit of work. I think two questions. One is thinking about the target within the theory. What are the different targets? So sort of I'm used to thinking about specifying intervention content in terms of interventions that have behavior as a target. And in terms of my simple way of thinking about psychology and people, I think about behavior and cognition and emotion within environment and them all interacting with each other. And one of the questions I had in my mind as you're speaking, would it be of any interest or use to think about all the techniques that you've isolated in relation to the target? So some of them, especially the ones to do with competence, some of them I recognized in terms of being equivalent to behavior change techniques, but other of them may have specifically had more emotion and more cognition as the targets. Now, I know it's slicing up the cake in a different way, but one of the things I think is really important is to make the connections between different theories or bodies of work and other bodies of work. And so I thought that might be a neat way of doing things. And also, quite often people have come, and I think it'd be great to do it, is to do a similar thing with cognitive behavioral therapy and really specify what's in that. But again, it would mean being clear about what the target was and thinking about what intervention techniques. And in terms of the ones with behavior at the end, I think it'd be really useful to then just map it across with the behavior change techniques to, rather than using different labels or whatever, as much as possible, try and make them equivalent.
Well, first thing I'll say is that that's why you're on the team, to help us, well, first of all, think about it in more and more evolved ways, but also to see where the links might be with existing work that you've been doing. So we have that on the map, on the program, is to some extent, once we finish this first phase, to see how they link with existing techniques and see where the overlap might be, or how we can maybe change the other ones in light of the ones that are already, the taxonomy that are already in place. In relation to your previous question, I'm tempted to use theory, actually, the same way to see how it sees the concepts that you were highlighting, say cognitive constructs or thoughts or emotions, and see what does SDT say of them, and then see whether they would be appropriate targets. I guess that would be my thinking about it. As I've said, SDT does not conceive of the need as neither a cognitive function or an emotion, for that matter. So, where would those fit? I guess might be the question. For instance, when it comes to emotions, SDT tends to think of them as markers, not targets necessarily. So as markers, and I just merged the two words, as created a new one, as markers or indicators of, let's say, the organism's well-being or the cumulative state of need satisfaction, if you'd like, and people can be trained, and we can in an intervention. In intervention, we would use them. We would use them as, for instance, sources of information, useful sources of information. That's how it would be introduced in an intervention. Now, again, if you go back to theory, you wouldn't necessarily think of a particular emotion as a target, because it is not thought of as a mechanism of change, it's more a consequence of motivation than a precursor of motivation, if I may say so. And the same principle could be applied in terms of cognitions. And again, people are not necessarily aware of their state of need satisfaction, of how autonomous they feel, and that can also be part of the intervention. So we bring it to conscious awareness. You would bring it to cognition, if you'd like. You discuss it as a thought, as an idea, but it doesn't make it necessarily a cognitive target of the intervention, if this makes sense. So that would be my. I did have a sort of a follow-up thought, if the chair allows me, to Duarte Araújo's question, which is the extent to which we were looking at the Common B, and I've looked at it many times, and if you noticed, I'm sure everyone noticed that there were arrows pointing from opportunity to motivation and from competence or ability to motivation, and I was curious, why isn't the arrow going both ways? And I was curious further to speculate whether, by doing it in that way, aren't we in the presence of some sort of a meta-theoretical assumption that the entry points for behavior change would not start with motivation, would start elsewhere? And this is just, of course, there might be multiple and better reasons for it to be that way, but I would be inclined to think of motivation as the entry point. Because, as we've actually discussed, I think you said it before, that people are agents, and they act on their environment, and they create opportunities, and they are often inclined to develop their skills and competencies. And I would think that a critical determinant of those arrows would be what they want, would be what they really want.
Yeah. So you're not the first person to have asked that question. But if you think about it, how does motivation get through to opportunity, to changing the environment? It only can get through to changing the environment through behavior. So that it's not a direct link, it's through behavior. Similarly, how would increased motivation end up with somebody more competent unless it went through behavior? So that's why those two, it's not that they're not direct, they're not linked. It's just that the link is via behavior.
So
yeah.
there's the other arrows in the system from behavior to back to.
Exactly.
Add to that.
So as long as you don't contradict it.
Well, actually, Susan and I have had discussions about this quite a bit, and quite clearly, the arrow has to go from opportunity to motivation and cannot go directly the other way around, just from the laws of physics. But we have discussed whether the other arrow should be double-headed or not. And I'll give you an illustration, and I don't know whether it's what to make of it, but maybe you can decide. When I first started working in the field of smoking back in the early 1980s, we were interested in the effects of nicotine as a performance enhancing drug. There was a widespread view there. It isn't, by the way, but it isn't in a meaningful way. But we were interested. So we were doing a study in which we took a very, very simple task, which was how fast you can tap on a key, right? Just that, right? As fast as you possibly can. And my boss at the time, a guy called Michael Russell, who's the founding father of all of the research that we do now in smoking cessation, he was really slow at this task. And so I offered him a bottle of very nice French wine if he could speed up. You'd think he was going as fast as he thought he could, right? His capability, this was it, right? But I offered him a really nice bottle of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Okay, yeah, very generous of me. I thought I wasn't going to lose this bottle, but anyway, suddenly he speeded up. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. He thought he was going as fast as he could. His capability, he was operating at the limits of his capability, but some motivation came in there, and he increased his performance. So the question is, can motivation have a direct effect on capability? There's another example, which is, some of you will, if you're psychologists, will have heard of this thing called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It's a law, and actually, if you're a sports scientist, it's very relevant, because it is a law which relates to your level of arousal, physiological arousal, to to performance. And it's an inverted U. At low levels of arousal, poor performance. If the arousal level gets too high, poor performance. You need to find the optimum level of arousal to maximize performance. Now, so if you push someone along that level of arousal, for example, by over-rewarding them, promising them something they get really excited about, then it can tip them over the edge and their performance can actually get worse. So it's a question, it's an interesting question. It could be, as Susan says, that it's working through some other mechanism. It's not a direct link. But it does raise the question about whether that arrow should be double-headed. But as with all of these things, this is work in progress. And you look at the evidence and then you see whether you need to change it or not.
So I think there are two different questions, or I'm reading two different questions in what you're asking. One is about, do you define the behaviour change technique in just the form of it, rather than in terms of the extent to which it's active, put it that way. And the other question is about the level of specification. And I think you're also asking something about theory, which I haven't quite got, so I'll just do those first two and somebody can pick up the other one. But in terms of sticking with the idea about reward, it's not enough just to say that a sweetie was a reward, or just define it as a form. It's got to be defined, I think this is maybe what you're asking, in terms of the theory, because what is rewarding for one person is not rewarding for another person. So it has to be defined in terms of what's likely to be rewarding. So that's one problem, is that you're trying to describe a written intervention. You're talking about rewards there, but for that group, it just may not be rewarding, or the rewards may have been delivered in a really poor way, so that the function wasn't rewarding. So it wasn't even a good test of that. To give an example in relation to goal setting, because it's a question that's come off quite a bit, is about delivery. Well, a behaviour change technique could be delivered well, or it could be delivered badly. If it's been delivered badly, it could even be counterproductive. And we had a PhD student, Fabiola Cato, who looked at this in relation to goal setting, in terms of smoking cessation. And she listened to lots of transcripts, and she identified a reliable 10-point scale of sort of quality of delivery of that one behaviour change technique, and looked at the association between the score out of 10, I think it was, or score out of 7, and whether people reported quitting smoking. And there was a positive association. So that's an example where it's not just is it delivered, but how well is it delivered? But also, any one of these techniques can be further refined in different types. So if you take reward, there's lots of types of reward. There's material reward, there's moral reward, or incentives, moral and social, etc. And they can be delivered with different contingencies which can have a big effect. So this is only a first cut in terms of describing what's going on. There's many different dimensions and levels. So it's the beginning word, a long way from the end word. But that probably didn't answer your question. If not, do answer again. Somebody else can have a go. I'm happy to start an answer, but I'm sure everybody's got questions. I think that with any kind of intervention, pharmacological or surgical or any kind of medical intervention, it inevitably is part of a bigger intervention of communication and often lots of other things that are going along with that, you know, persuasion, etc. And I think the more that can be understood and formalised and the quality can be made good, so the competencies can be increased, the more effective the medical interventions will be. So we know a huge percentage of prescribed drugs aren't taken the way they should be, which is partly motivational, partly competence, etc. And it requires training to be able to communicate with the patient in order to improve the chance that it will be taken. And recovery from surgery, I mean, there's a huge number of different kind of medical interventions and outcomes where there's a really important psychological dimension that, you know, should be developed.
Well, I would take issue with your question because I think as a medical doctor, you do. I mean, you may not always think you're doing it, but you do form a theory. You have to form a theory. So, for example, what the patient comes with is a set of symptoms. Let's say the patient comes with breathing difficulties. You need to know, is that because of a problem with their lungs, or is it a problem with their heart, or what? It could be a whole range of things. So you do a number of diagnostic tests to help you to decide what treatment. If you get it wrong, the patient may die. And so I think once you've established what then I think you're talking about is once you've established a probable cause, then there are a number of treatment options which you might use, and very often you don't know which treatment option is going to be the best one. I mean, I think in dermatology, for example, it's very classically symptomatic treatment because it's very difficult to know what's going on. But if you make the rash go away, fine. So sometimes we do that with behavior change as well. But where possible, I think we do try to understand causes. Similarly, if someone comes with a headache, it's very important to know, is it because of a brain tumor or is it because of some self-limiting condition? So when it comes to behavior change, I think that we have to be pragmatic, but we also have to narrow down the options as best we can. And so what Susan was talking about with a combi analysis is very important. And I'll give you an example in an area that I used to work in, which is road traffic accidents. When we started working in this field, everyone knows that young male drivers are extremely dangerous, right? And they have a lot of accidents. The theory was that what the problem was a lack of capability, that as novice drivers, they lacked the skills. What we soon discovered was actually the capability wasn't the problem, it was motivation. They had the skills, but their whole approach to life and to driving was one which meant that they put themselves in risky situations. So for a decade or more, they were using interventions that were based on the wrong target. They were trying to improve their skills when actually what they needed to do was to change their motivation. So I think, it is important to diagnose what the problem is, but you also have to be pragmatic and realize that if you can't, you try things out, and that helps to determine whether you are successful.
2 minutes or so. Again, Marlene.
Well, you make a very good point. Obviously, the area that I work in, smoking, is one where I can give examples relatively easily. But we did a study in which we looked at successful ex-smokers, people who had managed to stop for at least a year. And what we had expected to see was that the ones who were successful were ones who renounced their past identity. And we know smokers like that. So, they say, well, I was a fool, I was mad, this was crazy, and now I'm a new person. But that's not what we found. What we found was, yes, there were those people, but there were also ex-smokers who maintained continuity with their previous identity. They said, I'm happy that I was a smoker, but I'm not a smoker now. And the reason I'm not a smoker now is because I've moved on. That was me then, in those days, and this is me now. This is before I had children. Now I've got children. There are a different set of things operating. So I think we need to recognize that if in our behavior change interventions, we're always seeking, we're seeking to move someone on, if we are always going to be seeking to get them to renounce their past identity, we will be unsuccessful. That many people won't want to do that. But if you allow people to maintain their self-worth and their past self and say, well, okay, that's fine, that was then, but now things are different and I'm a different person, that's okay. So I think there's very practical reasons for supporting what you say.
We will finish the session and we'll have close the interval for 10 minutes? 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, okay? And then we will